Frank Miller straightened his tie and took a deep breath. The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber loomed before him, their ancient metal gleaming under the blue-white light of Centauri Prime's twin suns. After 3 years as Earth's ambassador to the stars, he still felt small before these doors. Today, that feeling was worse than ever. "They won't like what you have to say," whispered his assistant, Diane Powell. Her eyes darted nervously to the Zextal guards flanking the entrance. "They never do," Frank replied with a tired smile. "But this time they can't ignore the evidence." In his secure diplomatic case, Frank carried something that could change humanity's standing in the galaxy forever. Proof that council members had been illegally mining asteroids in Earth's solar system, violating the very treaties they had forced humanity to sign. For 3 years, the 27 alien species of the Council had treated humans like children, setting impossible standards and moving goalposts whenever Earth came close to meeting them. The doors swung open silently, despite their enormous size. Inside, the semicircular chamber stretched upward for hundreds of feet, with delegate pods arranged in 7 tiers. At the center stood the speaker's podium, where Frank would present his case. High above, the 7 Vordak elders watched from their private viewing box. The Vordak were among the oldest species in the galaxy. Tall, thin beings with gray skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern, blinked in unsettling patterns. They had founded the Council 10,000 years ago and had ruled it ever since. Ambassador Miller of Earth announced the chamber's AI in 17 different languages simultaneously. Approaching to address the full council on an emergency matter, Frank walked forward, feeling the eyes of hundreds of aliens upon him. Some, like the furry Arcturians, nodded in greeting. Others, like the silicon-based Drav, shifted their crystalline bodies to better watch him. The Vordak simply stared, their faces unreadable. "Honored Council," Frank began, his voice carrying through the chamber. "For 3 years I have stood before you as humanity requested admission to your ranks. For 3 years we have met every requirement set before us, only to have new demands made. Today I bring evidence that suggests why certain members of this council never intended to welcome humanity as equals." A murmur ran through the chamber. Frank tapped his case and holographic images appeared above the podium. Ships bearing council markings extracting minerals from the Kuiper Belt beyond Neptune, energy signatures showing repeated violations of Earth's territorial space, and communications, logs detailing plans to keep humans occupied with paperwork while the theft continued. "These actions violate Articles 17, 24, and 36 of the Galactic Charter," Frank said firmly. "Earth demands an immediate investigation and appropriate sanctions against silence." The voice of High Chancellor Kexvor of the Vordak cut through the chamber like a knife. His 4 eyes narrowed to slits. "These are fabrications, primitive, human deceptions." Frank held his ground. "The evidence has been authenticated by 3 independent sources, including your allies, the Arcturians." The chamber erupted. The Arcturian delegate Jormak rose from his pod. "We confirm the authentication. These violations appear genuine." The High Chancellor's skin darkened to a deep gray, a sign of anger among the Vordak. "Ambassador Miller, you come before this council with dangerous accusations. Such matters require careful investigation, not public spectacle." "We attempted to address this privately 6 times over the past month," Frank replied. "All requests were denied." Kexvor's upper eyes blinked rapidly while his lower eyes remained fixed on Frank, a gesture known among diplomatic corps as the death stare. "Guards," the High Chancellor said softly. "Detain the human ambassador for questioning." The Zextal guards moved toward Frank. Diane Powell stepped forward. "This violates diplomatic immunity under Section." One guard struck her with a shock baton. She collapsed to the floor. "Stop!" Frank shouted, rushing to Diane's side. "This is an outrage!" The guards seized Frank, their clawed hands digging into his arms. The council chamber had descended into chaos, with delegates shouting over each other. The Arcturian representative was demanding order while others called for Frank's immediate removal. "Order!" thundered Kexvor. The chamber fell silent. The human will be tried here and now for presenting false evidence and attempting to disrupt the harmony of the council. Frank struggled against his captors. This is not a trial, it's a farce. You're only doing this because the evidence is real. The next 12 hours were a blur of accusations. Frank was denied legal representation, denied communication with Earth, denied even water. The trial consisted of Vordak officials dismissing each piece of evidence while the council watched. Many delegates seemed uncomfortable, but none spoke up. The Arcturian who had supported Frank earlier was mysteriously absent. As the Centauri system's primary sun set, Kexivore delivered the verdict. Ambassador Frank Miller of Earth, you have been found guilty of fabricating evidence, slander against council members, and attempting to disrupt galactic peace. Frank, exhausted and bruised, looked up from where he knelt on the hard floor. My evidence is real. You know it's real. And Earth will know what happened here. Earth will know what happens to those who challenge the council, Kexivore replied. His voice carried no emotion, just cold certainty. The penalty is death. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Capital punishment had not been used by the council in thousands of years. High Chancellor, the Proxima delegate protested. Surely this exceeds. The decision is made. Kexivore cut her off. The human race must learn its place. The execution will be broadcast to all council worlds, including Earth. The guards dragged Frank to the center of the chamber. A circular platform rose from the floor, surrounded by a transparent barrier. Traditional methods are most appropriate for primitive species, Kexivore announced. At his gesture, flames erupted around Frank. Frank knew he should scream. He knew the council expected fear, expected humanity to be cowed by this display. Instead, he stood as straight as his battered body would allow and stared directly at the High Chancellor as the flames grew higher. You've just awakened something you can't possibly understand, Frank said, his voice somehow carrying over the roar of the fire. The flames engulfed him completely. On Earth, in homes and offices and public squares, billions watched in horror as their ambassador burned. In the Oval Office, President Ellen Scott's face had gone pale. Admiral Peter Blackwood stood rigid, his knuckles white as he gripped the back of a chair. Get me the Joint Chiefs, President Scott said, her voice barely above a whisper. All of them. Now. As the transmission from Centauri Prime ended, she looked up at the Admiral. They just declared war on humanity. They just don't know it yet. The Situation Room beneath the White House hummed with tension. 24 hours had passed since Ambassador Frank Miller's execution. No one had slept. Coffee cups and energy drink cans littered the long table where Earth's most powerful leaders sat in grim silence. President Ellen Scott stood at the head of the table, her face lined with grief and rage. The screens behind her still showed frozen images from the broadcast. Frank Miller standing tall as flames consumed him. The Galactic Council expects us to cower, she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. They expect us to apologize, to beg forgiveness for Miller's lies, and promise to be good little humans. She looked at each person around the table. That is not going to happen. Admiral Peter Blackwood, head of Earth Space Force, nodded. Madam President, humanity has been preparing for this day since we discovered we weren't alone in the universe. The Council thinks they know our military capabilities, they don't. He tapped his tablet and the screens changed to show a solar system map. Hidden bases lit up throughout the asteroid belt, on Mars, on several moons of Jupiter and Saturn. 300 warships, 700 spacefighters, 40,000 troops trained for zero-gravity combat, all hidden from Council scanners using tech we developed ourselves. They believe we're primitives, said General Laura Holt, her weathered face grim. They've never bothered to study our history of warfare. Dr. Susan Hayes, Earth's leading expert on alien psychology, leaned forward. We should consider a measured response. The Vordak orchestrated this, not all 27 species. Many council members looked shocked at Miller's sentence. They did nothing to stop it, Admiral Blackwood countered. How many of our diplomats need to die before we show them we're not to be trifled with? The President's security chief, Greg Davis, cleared his throat. We've received communications from the Arcturians and Proxima colonists. They want us to know they oppose the execution and are withdrawing from Council space in protest. Put them through, ordered President Scott. The main screen flashed, then showed the furry fox-like face of Jormak, the Arcturian ambassador. President Scott, he said, his large eyes filled with sorrow. I must express my people's deepest regrets over Ambassador Miller's murder. The Arcturian Confederation formally condemns the Council's actions. Where were you during his sham trial? Demanded Admiral Blackwood. Detained, Jormak replied, his ears flattening against his head. Many who would have spoken for him were prevented from attending. The Vordak planned this from the beginning. The screen split to show the crystalline features of K-Teth, representative of the Proxima colonists. Humans of Earth, you should know that the Council greatly underestimates you. They have dismissed your achievements, your technology, your military capability. They believe your species is emotional and impulsive, but ultimately weak. President Scott's eyes narrowed. They're about to learn how wrong they are. After the call ended, she turned back to her advisors. Options. Admiral Blackwood stood. What followed was a detailed presentation of what would become known as the Blackwood Doctrine, a military response so overwhelming that humanity would never again be treated as inferior. We strike simultaneously at 7 targets, he explained, pointing to the major communication hubs that connected Council worlds. We cut them off from each other, then isolate the 7 species that voted for Miller's execution, beginning with the Vordak. Civilian casualties? The President asked. Minimal to none, Blackwood answered immediately. This isn't about slaughter, Madam President. It's about showing strength and demanding respect. For 6 hours, they debated strategies, timelines, and ethical boundaries. Dr. Hayes argued repeatedly for diplomatic solutions, but with each passing hour, it became clear that the Council was already preparing for human submission, not human retaliation. Finally, President Scott called for a vote. The decision was unanimous. Earth would go to war. Operation Memento Mori. The President named it quietly. So they remember we all die in the end. She looked at Admiral Blackwood. You have authorization to deploy the fleet. First objective, disable their communication network. Second, isolate the Vordak homeworld. No mercy for their military, but I want minimal civilian casualties. Yes, Madam President. Across Earth, military personnel who had been on standby received their activation codes. Hidden bases throughout the solar system hummed to life. Ships that had never flown in combat were prepared for war. On the lunar base, Armstrong, Captain Olivia Wright, received her orders with steady hands. Her ship, the stealth carrier Retribution, had been built in secret on the far side of the moon. Now she would lead the first strike team to the Epsilon Hub, the largest communication relay in Council space. All hands to battle stations, she announced over the ship-wide comm. Prepare for departure in 30 minutes. Lieutenant John Martinez checked his equipment one last time. As leader of the infiltration team, he would spearhead the ground assault on the hub. 6 years of Special Forces training had prepared him for this moment. Ready, sir, his team responded in unison. Throughout the solar system, similar scenes played out as humanity prepared for war. Ships detached from hidden docks, troops boarded transports, and weapon systems came online. Admiral Blackwood stood on the bridge of his flagship, the dreadnought Vindication, watching as the fleet assembled in the shadow of Jupiter. Sir, his communications officer called out, the Council is broadcasting. They're demanding Earth send representatives to apologize for Ambassador Miller's criminal actions and to negotiate reparations for the discord he caused. The bridge fell silent. The Admiral smiled coldly. Send no reply, he ordered. Let our actions speak for us. All ships report ready, sir. Blackwood nodded. Execute jump sequence. Begin Operation Memento Mori. 300 warships vanished into faster-than-light travel, leaving the solar system seemingly empty and defenseless. On Centauri Prime, High Chancellor Kex Vor of the Vordak received news that Earth had gone silent. All communication attempts had failed. His advisors suggested the humans were in disarray, perhaps experiencing civil unrest after witnessing their ambassador's punishment. They will learn obedience through fear, Kexvor stated confidently to the remaining council members. Soon, they will beg for our forgiveness. At that exact moment, the first human strike teams emerged from FTL travel at the 7 major communication hubs that connected the Galactic Council worlds. The Epsilon hub, largest of them all, detected the retribution only seconds before Captain Wright gave the order to fire. "Target their defense grid only," she commanded. "Minimal collateral damage." Across Council space, the pattern repeated. Precision strikes disabled defenses, followed by infiltration teams who took control of key systems. Within hours, for the EUR first time in thousands of years, the Council worlds fell silent, cut off from one another. The war had begun and humanity had fired the first shot. 6 months into the war, the Galactic Council was in chaos. The 7 communication hubs that had connected their worlds for thousands of years remained under human control. For the first time in their long history, the 27 species of the Council were isolated from one another, forced to act independently without the Vordak's constant guidance. Captain Olivia Wright stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching as her crew monitored the Epsilon hub. The massive station hung in space before them, now a forward operating base for human forces. What had once been the crown jewel of Council communications now served as humanity's eyes and ears. "Status. Report," she said to her second-in-command, Commander Steve Bennett. "All quiet, Captain. The Drav attempted another recovery operation 3 hours ago. 4 ships. We disabled their engines and sent them back with a warning." Olivia nodded. The Drav were silicon-based life forms, their bodies resembling humanoid crystals. They had been among the 7 species who voted to execute Frank Miller. Now they were paying the price. "Any word from Martinez and his team?" she asked. "They've infiltrated the Vordak Central Archives on Centauri Prime. Data extraction is ongoing." Lieutenant John Martinez and his team of 12 infiltrators had been behind enemy lines for over 4 months. Their mission: hack into the Council's secure networks and extract everything. Their secrets, their lies, their plans for humanity. They moved like ghosts through Vordak society, using stealth tech that had been developed in secret on Earth for decades. On Centauri Prime, Martinez crouched in the shadows of a vast library. The building housed the physical and digital records of the Vordak's 10,000-year rule. His team had split up, each person accessing different terminals throughout the structure. "Almost done," whispered Sergeant Kelly Ross through their secure comlink. "You won't believe what I'm finding. The Vordak have been manipulating Council species for centuries, staging conflicts, controlling resources." "Copy that," Martinez replied. "Download everything. We have 30 minutes before the guard patrol returns." Their infiltration suits rendered them nearly invisible to Vordak sensors. The few guards in the archive moved past them without suspicion. Years of training in Earth Special Forces had prepared them for this moment. Back on Earth, President Ellen Scott met with her War Cabinet daily. Today's meeting focused on the intelligence being gathered across Council space. "Dr. Hayes," the President said, "what are we learning about Council worlds now that we've broken their communications?" Susan Hayes, the xenopsychologist, displayed a holographic map showing various Council planets. "Rebellion, Madam President. Many worlds are rising up against their Vordak overlords. It seems our information releases are having the desired effect." Admiral Blackwood smiled grimly. "Phase 2 is working better than expected." Phase 2 of Operation Memento. Mori involved releasing select pieces of intelligence to oppressed Council worlds, evidence of how the Vordak had manipulated and controlled them for millennia. The strategy wasn't just military, it was psychological. "The Arcturians have formally allied with us," General Laura Holt reported. "They're providing intelligence. On Council fleet movements, the Proxima colonists are also offering support." "And the Vordak?" asked the President. "Isolated and increasingly desperate," Admiral Blackwood replied. "They've attempted to contact us through back channels 3 times in the past week. They want to negotiate." President Scott's eyes hardened. What are our terms? Unconditional surrender, said Blackwood without hesitation. Nothing less. On a distant world called Naruvis, a council member race called the Zalcon were in open revolt. For centuries, they had provided resources to the Vordak in exchange for protection. Now, with humans controlling the communication networks, they had learned this protection was from threats the Vordak themselves had created. Captain Olivia Wright had been dispatched to Naruvis with a small fleet to support the rebellion. Her orders: assist but do not interfere in their internal affairs. Captain, called out her tactical officer, we have 5 Vordak warships approaching the planet. Battle stations, Wright ordered calmly. Defensive formation Alpha. Protect the planet but let the Vordak make the first move. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency. In 6 months of war, they had engaged Council forces dozens of times. Each encounter followed the same pattern. Precise strikes against military targets, minimal civilian casualties, and clear messages about why this was happening. The Vordak ships approached, their sleek black hulls absorbing light. They're charging weapons, reported the tactical officer. Hold position, Wright ordered. Let them fire first. The lead Vordak ship launched its attack, energy beams streaking toward the Retribution. The human vessel's shields absorbed the impact. Return fire, Wright commanded. Target their weapon systems only. The Retribution's advanced targeting systems locked onto the Vordak ships. Unlike Council weapons, which were designed for widespread destruction, human weapons had been developed for surgical precision. Beams of concentrated energy shot out, disabling the Vordak ship's weapon systems without destroying the vessels. Open. A channel, Wright ordered. The face of a Vordak commander appeared on screen, all 4 eyes blinking rapidly in anger and fear. This is Captain Olivia Wright of Earth. Your weapons are disabled. Withdraw from this system immediately or we will destroy your engines as well. You have no authority here, human, the Vordak hissed. This world belongs to the Council. This world belongs to its people, Wright replied. The days of Vordak rule are over. As the disabled Vordak ships retreated, cheers erupted from the Zalcon cities below. Another world freed from Council control. On Centauri Prime, Martinez and his team completed their mission. The data they extracted revealed the full extent of Vordak plans for humanity. Earth had never been intended for membership in the Council. Instead, the Vordak had planned to eventually claim Earth as a resource world, with humans serving as little more than labor. Send it all, Martinez ordered. Every file, every recording, every secret. Transmit to all Council worlds simultaneously. Within hours, the final pieces of the Vordak's 1,000-year deception spread across the galaxy. Worlds that had been loyal to the Council now questioned everything. Species that had believed themselves partners learned they had always been pawns. Indau, the Council chamber on Centauri Prime, High Chancellor Kexvor faced a diminishing group of allies. Many representatives had fled back to their homeworlds. Others had openly declared support for the human cause. How is this happening? Demanded the Chancellor, his skin darkening with rage. They are primitives. They should have cowered before our might. An aide approached nervously. High Chancellor, we've received word that the humans are planning their final assault. They will reach Centauri Prime within days. Kexvor's 4 eyes blinked in different patterns, a sign of extreme stress. Call in all remaining ships. We will make our stand here at the heart of the Council. As orders went out across what remained of Council space, a grim reality settled over the Vordak leadership. The primitives they had so easily dismissed had outmaneuvered them at every turn. The war they had started by burning 1 human alive was about to reach their doorstep, and humanity was coming for justice. 1 year after Ambassador Frank Miller's execution, the combined Earth fleet approached Centauri Prime. 200 warships moved in perfect formation, their hulls bearing the scars of countless battles. At their center flew the massive dreadnought, Vindication command ship of Admiral Peter Blackwood and General Samantha Reed. General Reed stood on the bridge, watching as the blue-white glow of Centauri's twin suns grew larger on the main view screen. A year of war had aged her. Silver streaks now ran through her once dark hair and new lines marked her face, but her eyes remained sharp and determined. "Status report," she called out to the bridge crew. "All ships in position, General," replied the communications officer. "Arcturian and Proxima forces are standing by. Lieutenant Martinez and his team have disabled the planetary defense grid from the surface." Reed nodded. After a year of surgical strikes and calculated military actions, they had reached the final objective, the Vordak homeworld and the seat of the Galactic Council. "Open a channel to all Earth ships," she ordered. When the channel was ready, she spoke clearly. "This is General Samantha Reed. 1 year ago we watched as the Vordak burned our ambassador alive. They thought we would cower. They thought we would beg. They were wrong." She paused. "Today, we end this war. But remember our orders. Military targets only. The Vordak civilians are not our enemy. Admiral Blackwood and I expect precision, discipline, and honor from every soldier and pilot." Read out. On the planet below, Lieutenant John Martinez and his infiltration team moved through the capital city. A year behind enemy lines had changed them. They wore pieces of Vordak clothing to blend in, and their faces were weathered from constant stress. "Defense grid is down," Martinez confirmed through his secure comm. "We've also secured the main power station. On your command, we can cut power to military installations while keeping civilian areas online." "Good work, Lieutenant," Reed's voice came back. "Stand by." In orbit, the Vordak defense fleet assembled. 70 warships, all that remained of their once vast armada, formed a protective barrier around the planet. High Chancellor Kexvor commanded from the flagship at the center. "The humans must not reach the surface," he ordered, his 4 eyes blinking in agitation. "Destroy them at all costs." The Vordak fleet opened fire. Energy beams lanced out towards the Earth ships, but humanity had spent a year studying Vordak weapons and defenses. The Earth fleet's shields held strong. "They fired first," Admiral Blackwood noted calmly. "Now we can respond. Deploy the QDA." The QDA, Quantum Displacement Array, was humanity's most advanced weapon system. Developed in secret over decades, it had been saved for this final battle. From the underside of the Vindication, a massive array unfolded like a blooming flower. "QDA charged and ready," reported the weapons officer. "Target their weapon systems only," ordered Blackwood. "Fire." The array pulsed once. There was no beam, no visible projectile. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, across the Vordak, fleet weapon systems simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, but displaced into quantum space. Panic spread through the Vordak fleet as ship after ship lost its ability to fight. Without weapons, they were defenseless. "Open a channel to the Vordak flagship," Blackwood commanded. The face of High Chancellor Kexavor appeared on screen, his gray skin nearly white with fear. "This is Admiral Peter Blackwood of Earth. Your weapons are gone. Not damaged, gone. Surrender now and we will allow your crews to evacuate before we disable your engines." "Impossible," breathed Kexvor. "No species has such technology." "The primitives you dismissed have surpassed you," Blackwood replied evenly. "You have 5 minutes to surrender." The Vordak ships began to scatter, breaking formation as their crews panicked. On the Vindications bridge, General Reed watched with grim satisfaction. "Begin landing operations," she ordered. "All ground forces prepare for deployment." Transport ships descended toward Centauri Prime, carrying thousands of Earth soldiers. Their destination, the Galactic Citadel, seat of the Council and the place where Frank Miller had been executed. On the surface, Martinez and his team waited near the Citadel's main entrance. They had spent months mapping every corridor, every security measure. Now they would guide the main assault force through the massive structure. "Team in position," Martinez reported. "Ready when you are, General." The first transport ships landed in the plaza outside the Citadel. Earth troops poured out, their armor gleaming in the light of the twin suns. General Reed led them, her sidearm drawn. "Lieutenant Martinez, take point," she ordered as their forces merged. Together, they entered the citadel. The few Vordak guards who resisted were quickly subdued. Most simply surrendered, dropping their weapons at the sight of the human forces, and they approached the council chamber. They encountered Lieutenant Paul Warren, another member of Martinez's infiltration team. His face was grim. "General, you need to see this," he said, handing her a datapad. "We found it in the Chancellor's private archives." Reed examined the files, her expression hardening. The documents detailed plans for Earth's future, not as a council member but as a resource world. The Vordak had intended to introduce diseases to reduce human population, then use the survivors as labor. The execution of Frank Miller had been planned long before he discovered their illegal mining operations. "Make sure every Earth soldier sees this," she ordered. "They need to know why we're here." The combined human forces reached the council chamber, the same room where Ambassador Miller had been burned alive. High Chancellor Kexfor and the remaining council leaders had barricaded themselves inside. "Breach it," Reed ordered. Earth soldiers placed charges around the massive doors. The explosion echoed through the citadel, and the doors fell inward with a crash. Human troops poured in, weapons ready. The council members cowered at the far end of the chamber. In the center stood the same platform where Frank Miller had died. The scorch marks were still visible on its surface. High Chancellor Kexfor stepped forward, his four eyes fixed on General Reed and Admiral Blackwood, who had joined the ground assault. "You have won, humans," he said, his voice quivering. "What, now? Will you burn us as we burned your ambassador? An eye for an eye, as your primitive sayings go?" Admiral Blackwood walked slowly to the platform where Miller had died. He knelt and touched the burned surface, then looked up at Kexfor. "We could," he said simply. "We could give you the same trial you gave him, the same chance." He stood. "But we are not you." Commander Lisa Chen, who had served with Miller before his diplomatic posting, stepped forward. "We came for justice, not revenge," she said. "You will stand trial for war crimes against humanity and against the other species you've manipulated for centuries. But it will be a real trial, with evidence and laws and rights." The Vordak leaders were placed in restraints. As they were led away, General Reed looked around the council chamber, a place that had represented oppression for so many species for so long. "Secure the planet," she ordered. "The war is over." But the hardest part still lay ahead, building a lasting peace from the ashes of absolute war. 3 years after the fall of Centauri Prime, a new structure stood in the center of the capital city. Unlike the dark, imposing Galactic citadel, this building was made of gleaming white stone and clear crystal, open to the light of the twin suns. Above its main entrance, words were carved in 27 different languages. Alliance Hall, where all voices are heard. Inside, representatives from across the galaxy gathered in a circular chamber. No species sat higher than others. No voice carried more weight. This was the Galactic Alliance, built from the ashes of the old council. Ambassador Nicole Foster of Earth stood at the central podium. At 42, she was the youngest human ever to serve as chair of the Alliance. She looked out at the gathered representatives, her expression solemn. 3 years ago today, we ended a war that should never have started, she began. Today, we dedicate this memorial to the person whose death sparked that conflict, but whose spirit guides our new beginning. At her gesture, a section of the floor in the center of the chamber slid open. From below rose a simple, yet elegant, statue, Ambassador Frank Miller standing tall, his arms at his sides, his expression peaceful but determined. At the base of the statue, his final words were inscribed. "You've just awakened something you can't possibly understand." What Ambassador Miller awakened was not just humanity's wrath, Foster continued. He awakened a galaxy's desire for true equality, for real justice, for a system where no species dominates another. The gathered representatives stood in respect, including many who had once been part of the old council. The Arcturians and the Proxima colonists, who had supported humanity during the war, occupied places of honor near the Earth delegation. Even a small group of Vordak, civilians who had opposed their leadership's actions, stood among them. Outside Alliance Hall, the city of New Dawn, formerly called Vordak Prime, bustled with activity. Where once only Vordak had been allowed to walk freely, now beings from across the galaxy mingled. Markets sold goods from 100 worlds. Children of different species played together in parks built where military installations had once stood. In a quiet garden near the Alliance Hall, Admiral Peter Blackwood, now retired, sat on a bench watching the activity. At 74, his hair had turned completely white, but his eyes remained sharp. He had commanded the final assault on Centauri Prime, had stood in the council chamber where Miller died, and had chosen justice over revenge. General Samantha Reed, also retired, sat beside him. They had come to attend the memorial dedication, two of the few remaining architects of humanity's response to Miller's execution. "Did you ever think we'd see this day?" Reed asked quietly. "When you gave the order to fire the QDA, did you imagine we'd be sitting here watching different species live together?" Blackwood shook his head slowly. "I thought we'd win. I never imagined we'd build something this meaningful from that victory." A young Vordak approached them hesitantly. Unlike the elders of her species, who had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern, this female had 3, a genetic variation once considered a defect under the old regime. "Excuse me," she said in careful English. "Are you Admiral Blackwood and General Reed, the humans who led the final battle?" They nodded. "I am studying history at the University of New Dawn," she explained. "My grandfather served in the old council. He voted against Ambassador Miller's execution but was overruled." She paused. "May I ask you something about humans? Something I don't understand." "Of course," Reed replied. "After what the council did, after all the planning against your species we uncovered, you could have destroyed us. Wiped out the Vordak completely. Many expected you would." Her 3 eyes blinked, in sequence. "Why didn't you?" Blackwood considered the question carefully. "Because that would have made us what they thought we were, violent primitives who solve problems with destruction. We wanted to be better than that." The young Vordak nodded thoughtfully and thanked them before continuing on her way. Inside the Alliance Hall, the ceremony continued. Dr. Susan Hayes, now in her 70s and the Alliance's chief advisor on interspecies relations, stepped up to the podium. "The Miller Doctrine has become our guiding principle," she said. "It states simply that any attack on any representative of any species will be considered an attack on all species, demanding immediate response from the entire Alliance. But more importantly, it reminds us that strength comes in many forms. Sometimes in military might, yes, but also in restraint, in justice, and in the ability to forgive without forgetting." In the orbiting space station that served as Earth's embassy, Lieutenant John Martinez, now Ambassador Martinez, watched the ceremony via holographic projection. The years of infiltration behind enemy lines had left him unsuited for peaceful life on Earth. Instead, he had found his calling in diplomacy, using his understanding of different species to build bridges rather than plan military operations. On his desk sat a small box containing the Medal of Honor he had received for his service during the war. Beside it lay a copy of the peace treaty that had officially ended the conflict between humanity and the former council races. His signature was one of many on the document. A chime sounded, and his aide entered. "Ambassador, the Drav delegation, has arrived for the trade negotiations." Martinez nodded. The Drav, crystalline beings who had once voted for Miller's death, were now among Earth's strongest trading partners. Their mineral-rich worlds complemented humanity's technological innovations. "Show them in," he said, "and please offer refreshments appropriate for their biology." As the day of remembrance continued across Centauri Prime, the final act of closure was taking place in a secure facility on the outskirts of New Dawn. Here, the former High Chancellor of the Vordak, Kexvor, and 6 other council leaders served their life sentences. They lived in comfortable but secure quarters, allowed access to knowledge and communication but never again to power. Their trial, fair, thorough, and transparent, had become a model for the Alliance justice system. President Ellen Scott, now in the final year of her term, made her annual visit to the facility. At 81, she moved more slowly but remained as sharp as ever. She had guided Earth through the war and the challenging peace that followed. Kexvor received her in a simple meeting room. Age had dulled his gray skin, and one of his 4 eyes had clouded over. "President Scott," he acknowledged, "you honor an old prisoner with your presence." "I come each year to ask the same question," she replied. "Do you understand yet what Ambassador Miller meant by his final words?" Kexvor was silent for a long moment. "I believe I am beginning to," he finally said. He spoke of humanity's capacity for both terrible wrath and astonishing mercy, a combination my species never understood until it was too late. Scott nodded and rose to leave. As she departed, she passed a window overlooking the gleaming city of New Dawn, where the memorial ceremony was concluding. From across the galaxy, representatives returned to their ships carrying with them the renewed commitment to peace and equality that had risen from the ashes of absolute war. In the fading light of Centauri's twin suns, the statue of Frank Miller stood as a reminder of how much had been lost and how much more had been gained.